The election of President Trump has brought sweeping changes to the relationship between the media and the White House. And this all comes in the age of the 24-hour news cycle in the digital age. Who better to explain it all to us than Bob Schieffer, the legendary journalist, former Face the Nation host, and CBS News political contributor. He has a new book out. It's called Overload, Finding the Truth in Today's Deluge of News. And Bob joins us now. Thank you so much. I think we needed this book. We need a guidebook because it's sort of like information overload now. You can get it on your TV screen, on your phone, the radio, the newspaper. There's a lot.
And you don't know if it's true, false, or somewhere in between because we're so overwhelmed with this information that's coming to us from so many different sources.
Yeah.
Some are credible, some are not.
Yeah.
Some are wrong by design because there are people now who figured out how to game this system,
right.
Including the Russians,
right.
who are putting this stuff in there disguised as American websites and it's all designed just to undermine the credibility of the news media.
And sometimes officials come right out and make statements denying recent reports, which is what we just saw. We just saw Rex Tillerson, in a rare statement, deny a report that came from NBC News. We've never seen him do something like that. What do you make of that?
Well, it was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
You had the Secretary of State coming out to deny a report that he had called the president a moron.
Yes.
And he would not say, in fact, if he had called him a moron. He just said, I'm not going to deal with that kind of thing. As I watched this statement, it was more like a hostage tape than it was like a statement from our top diplomat in the country. He obviously felt the need to come out and try to repair relations with the president. It's no secret that the president has not been pleased with Tillerson and what he has done. His most recent, basically what I would call undercutting, when he had, said on the record, we're trying to find some way to communicate with the North Koreans, and the president puts out a tweet and says, don't mess with it. We'll do what's necessary. Don't waste your time. Well, how can he possibly have any credibility? I think it's going to be very difficult for the Secretary of State, no matter what he said today, to continue because it's well known within the Washington community that the president has not been pleased, has questioned some of the things that he has done. Really the only thing the secretary denied in this statement today was that he had threatened to resign.
Right. Isn't that very curious? He denied one thing, which obviously leads to speculation about everything else that's being reported.
Well, I mean, what was he going to say about, I did call the president a moron? I mean, that'd be kind of a hard thing to say.
Yeah, right.
Or if he said, he's not a moron. I mean, I was thinking back to President Nixon's famous speech when he said the American people need to know your president is not a crook. Well, I suppose in some ways you had the Secretary of State saying today your president is not a moron, although he didn't put it in those terms.
Right.
But this was in a series of very unusual things that are said by our government officials these days. This will be right there with one of the more unusual.
Yeah, and you mentioned the president tweeting that Rex Tillerson was wasting his time attempting a diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. Let's talk a little bit about this business of tweeting and social media and the impact that it's having on how we consume news. What did you learn?
Well, let me just say up front, I wish the president wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
I don't think it is helpful in diplomacy or in advancing his cause. Now, I know that during the election, this was a very effective tool for him. He had a way of focusing attention on himself and changing the subject, no matter what it might be during the campaign. He would tweet early in the morning, and so the other candidates found themselves responding to whatever he had said in his tweets during those early morning hours. That's why he liked to call into early morning TV shows and radio shows.
You set the agenda for the day, essentially, set the talking points for the day.
Yes, but to me there is a difference in campaigning and governing. And I just simply don't believe that this is helpful. I mean, this business of the Secretary of State saying one thing about we're trying to make contact with the North Koreans, and the president coming in and just saying something totally different. I don't understand if that was a strategy. Some people say, well, it's good cop, bad cop. But if that was his strategy, I don't understand it. And I don't understand what he had hoped to gain with those outbursts.
Overloaded, right? We're overloaded with information. But why isn't more information a good thing? That would seem to be the logical argument. The more you know, the more informed you are. And it's not working out that way?
Well, here's the thing. We have access to more information than any people who've ever lived on the face of the earth at any time in history. Yeah. But are we wiser? Do we know more? Or are we simply overwhelmed with so much information we can't process it? And in the book, I conclude we're just simply overwhelmed at this point. We are in the midst of a technology revolution that has totally changed many things in our culture, including how we communicate with one another. It's had a profound impact on our politics. It's also had an impact on our culture in general. And what has happened here is with the decline of newspapers across the country, we have lost 126 newspapers over the last 12 years. The ones that are left, especially at the local level, are just a shell of what they once were. The whole idea of investigative reporting, it's just kind of a fond memory in many parts of the country. Here's an interesting little statistic for you. In 2004, 1 reporter in 8 lived in Washington, New York, or Los Angeles. Today, that number is down to 1 reporter in 5.
Wow.
That tells you what's happened to the people who used to cover the news at the local level.
Yeah, and also the perspective of the news. It's become centralized in certain cities.
So now more than 60% of the people, maybe as many as 68% of the people get their news, or much of their news, on social media, on Facebook, for example, which is fine. That's a great way to keep up with your neighbors. It's a great way to keep up with your relatives. But what we have to understand is the stories, the reports that appear on Facebook do not go through the same vetting that you get from your traditional news agencies. At CBS, we don't broadcast something unless we've checked it out and determined that it's true.
Yeah.
Things are getting out there now, true, false, and indifferent. Yesterday, I called CBS because something popped up on my browser that said this shooter in Las Vegas had converted to Islam.
Wow.
I thought that can that be right? He doesn't seem to fit the profile. And so I called and they said, no, it's totally without foundation. There were reports that the shooter was a liberal who loved Rachel Maddow. I mean, and they listed that as part of his profile. All of these things were absolutely false, and yet there's just this cavalcade of this information, and who can blame people for saying, who do I believe? Who can I trust? It's a very, very difficult problem. We're just now working our way through it.
You spoke to people in this industry from across the spectrum, editors, TV producers, all kinds of people. This is an era where now the mainstream media has become the target, has become suspect. What were the frustrations that they expressed to you?
Well, I mean, it's just trying to, get through this maw of misinformation. But the other part is there's some good news. CBSN is here now. Streaming has become an important thing. Sometimes at CBSN, you're getting more viewers, we found during the political conventions, than the network was getting when they came on the air. The Washington Post, the New York Times, they have totally reinvented themselves into, they're no longer just a newspaper company. They have multi-platforms, and they're reaching people in a variety of different ways. And the Post is once again making money, and that's a rare thing in the newspaper business these days. If the innovations that the Post has come up with, if this continues to work, this will be the model that newspapers up and down the line will have to follow. But you know, at the local level, where the advertising has gone away to eBay and all of that, they have simply got to find some kind of an economic business model that allows them to continue to thrive. My guess is that most of the newspapers will be going digital before all this is over. But here's the thing, if you go digital just because you can cut down on staff, that's not the answer.
Right.
The digital product has to be relevant, perhaps even more relevant than what people were seeing in their newspapers.
You need the human beings to get the news out.
But if we reach a point where there's not some entity that does what we've come to expect from local newspapers, we'll have corruption in this country at a level we've never seen before, because what the local newspaper always did is keep an eye on the local politicians and how they were spending their tax money. If we don't have that, we're in an entirely different environment.
Well, Bob, it is a fascinating idea for a book. We need a guide through all of this information. People need to know what the limitations of mainstream media is, but also the limitations of something like Facebook. Thank you very much. We appreciate it, Bob Schieffer.
Thank you so much.